Hi, everyone. This is David Cohen, and I'm here with my amazing co-host,
Brad Feld.
Hey, Brad. And this is the Give First podcast. And in the startup world, Give First means simply trying to help anyone, especially entrepreneurs, without any expectation of getting anything back. So we'll be talking to mentors and founders about what Give First looks like in action and how it makes great entrepreneurship possible.
We polled everyone, and they said consistently that their favorite part of the show was the legal mumbo jumbo. So here it is. The following discussion is an expression of personal opinion and does not represent the opinion of Techstars or any company we discuss. Our conversations for informational purposes only, including any mention of securities or funds. This is not legal, business, investment, or tax advice and is not intended for use by any investor. Certain of Techstars funds own or may own in the future securities in some of the companies discussed in this podcast. Got it?
I'm sitting here at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress where they made a nice podcast booth. It's kind of like a glass enclosure thing, like I'm in the James Bond movie, like I can't get out of the glass booth because I'm the bad guy. And there's all this stuff going on around us, and I'm just sitting here recording podcasts today.
Yeah, it's good to be in the fishbowl with you, Brad.
It's nice to see you. Everybody's ignoring us, though. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Ian, I know tons about you because, you and I spent a lot of time doing stuff, but tell the world about you.
Well, where do I begin?
What are you doing today? What are you doing now?
Yeah, so what am I doing now? Well, besides sitting here with you at GEC.
That was pedantic.
Main business is I run an early stage venture fund.
What's the name of it?
It's called FOVC, or Far Out Venture.
You have good LPs?
We have the best LPs.
Okay, I'm an LP.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Let's check them.
We invest, kind of first institutional check in B2B software companies. My partner Jonathan and I met at Techstars, so that's kind of our origin story. And on our website, we have a terrible website. It says one thing: mentorship-driven venture capital, and that's basically our guiding light.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Is it trademarked?
No, it's not.
Ooh.
Don't take it.
I'm not going to take it. And rumors are, since I have it on my schedule, that you have a podcast.
Yes.
Tell us about the podcast real quickly.
Recently launched. It's called Outsider Inc. So spending a lot of time on that. The whole idea, I assume we're going to get into Startup Community Way and other things, but the mission of the podcast is to tell the story of outsiders. So whether it's by geography or pedigree or background or identity or any other factors, people who have had success as entrepreneurs by breaking the mold. And it came out of a lot of the, talking about startup communities around the country, around the world, people wanting more stories. Also, as I was doing, some of the work at Techstars when we were working on strategy, where should accelerators be, working on the thesis for my fund, the reality is that there's a lot of great companies out there that just aren't in the popular press. So certainly when you look at the tech and venture-backed domain, places like Silicon Valley and New York obviously stand out. But there is a much longer tail out there, and I just want to tell those stories.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of fun to have a recursive podcast where we talk about podcasts, and maybe we can talk about no, never mind. So for anyone listening, you may or may not be aware that Ian and I co-authored a book called The Startup Community Way. It was the second book about startup communities. I had written the first one in 2012. It came out with a second edition in 2020, and Startup Community Way came out in 2020 as well, right at the beginning of COVID, or maybe COVID was going on for a couple months when it came out. The title, for those of you that don't recognize the homage, is to Eric Ries. Eric wrote two books. He wrote Lean Startup, and then he wrote The Lean Startup Way. And Eric was...
Startup Way.
Sorry, not The Lean Startup Way, The Startup Way. Eric was nice enough to write a forward for us. And there was a lot of, in addition to being friends for a while, there's a lot of sort of karmic overlap between the constructs.
Yeah.
Let's spend a little time talking about the origin story of the book. Like, how did you get to know me? Why did we bother, even talking? Did I respond to your first email? Where did it go?
Yeah, well, obviously your spam guard was broken that day, but no, it actually is a great story, about giving first. So I was living in London at the time. My wife and I, Susie, we were living in San Francisco. I had an analytics business, essentially a consulting business that I had exited to a consulting firm in London. So wasn't really happy with my day-to-day job. I was spending the day, pitching and doing projects for big tech, media, and financial services clients, Fortune 100 firms. But kind of on the nights and weekends, I was mentoring founders, advising, doing a little bit of angel investing, and doing a ton of writing on startups, on ecosystems. And that's how I met you. I met you through Richard Florida. He kind of connected us about writing around, the geography of entrepreneurship. And my 2-year commitment was coming up at the consulting firm, and I was miserable. And I said to my wife, Susie, who is much smarter than me, I need to bring, whether it's starting a business or working with founders, which I love doing, I need to bring it front and center. And she said, well, who's the person that you respect most? And I said, well, there's this guy, Brad, he's in Colorado. We've emailed, we're internet friends. I don't really know him. But, she said, you should reach out to him. And I did. And you called me and we talked. We had some back and forth phone calls, emails, and we landed on doing this book together and eventually coming and operationalizing some of that at Techstars. So it was me reaching out to you, asking for help. You obviously had some opinion of me that was worth it.
I actually have no memory of knowing anything about you. You were just yet another random inbound from my inbox.
Yes.
That showed up one day.
So
although I kind of remember the Richard Florida thing, and I also kind of remember a video interview that we did for some.
Oh yeah, you did about accelerators.
Yeah, so I kind of there was a couple of touch points.
That was a course I was teaching at NYU, teaching kind of policy people about like the X's and O's of startups. So there was nothing out there on accelerators, and so I video recorded you for that. That's right. I forgot about that.
The YouTubes probably have that somewhere. So
yeah.
If the book came out in mid 2020, then that was probably like 2019, right? It just happened really fast.
No, I think we met in 2016, and it took a little while to find our stride.
So wind the clock forward. So we've met each other. You've been thinking about this stuff for a while. You've been writing. Somehow I respond to you. Now all of a sudden we're talking about doing a book.
Yeah. And so the year is 2016. My son, Teddy, my first child, my oldest, he was born in October 2016. And we had agreed to get kind of started on the book. I don't know if it was spring or so of 2017, but my wife was on maternity leave. At the time, she was working for Salesforce. She works in talent acquisition, and she has a year off. In the UK, you get a year off, unlike the United States of America. And so it was your wise idea. You said, why don't you come to Boulder? You put us up. You have this condo that, for guests, it's usually for your parents, but you let us stay there for a little while. We had an awesome time. My son, Teddy, took his first attempts at steps in your apartment. So I will, never forget that.
We have them outlined on that floor, actually. But they mostly look like knees.
Yeah. Yeah. So he tried, successfully, I guess, ish. But yeah, so, some like really foundational memories were there, and it really connected me to Boulder. Thought it was a great way for us to build a relationship. We ultimately went back to London when she went back to work, but it was time well spent.
What was your favorite part of Boulder?
My favorite part of Boulder.
Ooh, if you had to wake up in the morning and go to breakfast somewhere, where would it be?
There was this little diner on the east side. I don't remember the name of it. A Greasy Spoon kind of place, kind of up 29th, I think.
Uh-huh.
But my favorite neighborhood in Boulder, well, maybe there's two. I like Old North Boulder a lot. I don't know why, but it just like vibes with me. But we spent the most time, there's the northernmost neighborhood is called like Dakota Ridge. There's the best playground there. And so that's probably where I spent the most time taking my son and my dog to go and say,
Sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. So we start talking about this idea for a follow-on to startup communities, which had been very popular. And, by 2020, I think there are a lot of people that understood the basic concepts in it, and were implementing it in lots of different ways. What do you remember about the initial goals that we had for Startup Community Way?
Well, I think it was to do a couple things. It was to evolve the thinking beyond Boulder, right? That was probably one of the big criticisms that people had was, hey, this startup communities, this is a book about Boulder. The deeper I went to in Boulder and spent the more time there, the less I'm accepting of that criticism, because I actually think it's a pretty idyllic community. I think the startup community in Boulder reflects the broader community itself. People are generally helpful. They have love of place, which are essential ingredients to any good startup community. There were some things that you wanted to correct, like the role of government and things like that.
I thought my starting point for the role of government in the first book was not very robust. It was basically stay the fuck out of the way and do no harm.
Yeah, but point well taken. I mean, that's still correct. But right?
There was definitely things could be
as well. So I don't know. For me, it was just like my goal was to like work on this and go super deep. I sort of took that founder's mentality to it, where I just blocked everything out for 3 months and read a bunch and talked to lots of people. I traveled to conferences and kind of came back with a different attitude about what we needed to do versus what I kind of thought was going to happen in the beginning.
So I remember a moment, I didn't have the acronym for it at the time. Today, I would have referred to you as my LLM. When I wrote Startup Communities, I didn't do any formal academic research. I'd read plenty of stuff about entrepreneurial ecosystems and talked to people, and I knew the history of incubators, of course, and I was part of the whole dynamic around creating this concept that's now commonly understood as an accelerator. But I hadn't really. I almost consciously decided with Startup Communities that I was not going to spend a lot of time with any formalisms, mostly because I wasn't very happy with anything that I encountered. A few things were interesting, and a few stories like Startup Israel were interesting stories, but none of it really landed for me in terms of a framework. And I recall pretty vividly, I don't know the number of them, but I recall that 50, 100 sort of academic papers, articles that were substantive articles in different places, and being synthesized, and you'd sort of send them to me. And at some point I said, I don't want these anymore. Send me the summaries, which of course is what I would have asked the LLM to do. Yeah. And I remember a day where we sat down and went through a bunch of stuff, and we were like in my conference room at Foundry, one of those rooms that had whiteboards on all sides, and we were just kind of both scribbling on the whiteboards for a couple hours. Do you remember that day?
Of course.
Tell me what that. Let's talk about what that day was.
Yeah, well, I think maybe also as you were talking, it reminded me of another rationale. There was a paper. There were actually several that were, for Startup Communities, the book not being an academic or research paper.
I know where you're going with this, yeah.
It was like foundational in academic literature. It was discussed, but it was often dismissed. And so obviously, before I became involved in business, I was a research economist. I still did writings for Brookings and Kauffman Foundation. And so I know about research. And so one of the things that I thought was, well, let's just stick it to them, because I know what the research will say if you put it together in the right framework. And so it was kind of a response to that. I wanted, and that makes this book not for everyone. I understand that, right? But I felt like it was an opportunity for us to merge those two minds, right? Sort of grassroots, practitioner meets kind of theoretical framework, and it actually happens to line up nicely for those who take the time to digest it.
So I remember you became more enraged than I did a couple of times. I remember one moment. For those of you out there that are fans of the TV show Succession, which I loved, and as an aside, Mountainhead, which just came out on HBO, which is by same guy, Jesse. I just lost his last name. The first half of Mountainhead is outstanding. The second half loses the plot and wanders around too much. there's a scene from Succession in the last season where Logan Roy is trying one last time to get his kids on side with his plans, and they're in like a karaoke bar or something in a private room, super high-end fancy things, and he's like trying and trying and trying, and the kids just won't sign up for whatever latest thing of manipulation he wants to do. He finally looks at him and says, "You are not serious people. You're just not serious people." And one of those papers, I'm not going to mention who wrote it because I don't need to call him out, but essentially what he wrote about startup communities in his very serious paper was this is some interesting anecdotes, but it's not that, Brad Feld is not a serious person, and this is not a serious book. And I remember you being enraged by that when we sort of stumbled upon it. It was a footnote. It was a footnote. It was kind of like one of those things like, that seems kind of gratuitous. Like, why? And of course, it's the nature of some of the academic publishing, and look, this has to be really formalized, et cetera. But I do remember kind of coming out of that. One of the efforts that you had was not to turn the book into this ponderous thing, but instead, we worked hard to get a framework that would allow some of the more rigorous underlying analysis in it, while at the same time making that framework a very easy framework to work with if you wanted just a framework. And when complex adaptive systems came out of that thinking, where the two of us sort of snapped in pretty much at the same time, startup community is just a complex adaptive system.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. At the time, I knew what a complex adaptive system was because I was interested in Santa Fe Institute and read a bunch of stuff when I was younger about how complex systems worked. But that was not a very common phrase in the context of anything startup related. Today, when we think about what has played out in so many ways in society, it's middle of 2025, 2020 was COVID.
Yeah.
Lots of things happened after, including once again the inflation and then the deflation of a bubble around tech companies. It probably was 2022, 2023 was the real turn downward. The incredible energy around everything AI, some of it being emergent, some of it being positive feedback loops, some of it being utter bullshit. And all of it being sort of this question of, are these things that are being invented and done, are they going to lead to salvation of humanity or extinction of humanity?
Yeah.
And then, of course, in the United States, the presidential election and this rapid reshaping or efforts to reshape, whether legally or illegally, huge aspects of government that are now having all of the ripple effects, not just of the reshaping, but of also the question as to whether the things that are being done are actually going to stand up to scrutiny or get run over or change. All of those things are examples of how complex adaptive systems work, where the x-axis is time and the y-axis isn't a predictable curve. When you think about that in the context of today and startups, and how you advise startups as an investor and how you work with other founders, how have you incorporated the idea of a complex adaptive system into that kind of activity, and maybe even make it self-referential? Because your venture fund hasn't followed a predictable path. Your time at Techstars didn't follow a predictable path. Maybe from an entrepreneur's perspective, how do you embrace that kind of change?
Yeah. So once you see the world through the lens of complex adaptive systems, it's really hard to unsee the world through that lens. It's everything from a dysfunctional family gathering, right, to traffic, to on and on and on, right? And it snapped into place immediately. For me, just quick sidebar on COVID, because we had this, COVID is unfolding as we're about to publish the book, and I have this framework locked in my mind, and I was the biggest alarmist about the world is shutting down, And at one point, Susie said to me, my wife said, listen, you got to calm down. You're scaring people. and I wasn't dramatic enough. The rate of change, right? The entropy just blows. The human mind can't calculate that. It's hard to remember back those days, but that was like, that just sticks with you. I think one of the most important things that how I think about it and work with it today is something that you talked about on my podcast, was just about initiating feedback loops, right? And sometimes those feedback loops are painful. Sometimes they, feel good. But the whole point is that we're just running lots of experiments and we're looking for feedbacks. And so that's really what startups are all about, is just a series of structured experiments. Another thing I would say too is that it's interesting to watch the nonlinear transformation of a company. Like when a funding round comes and suddenly the CEO goes from, I'm the smartest person, I'm the best coder, I'm the hub and spoke, to now you've raised a Series A round, you've got 50 employees, and all of a sudden you're losing control, right? The rate of change and the shape of the change is not proportional to what the mind is able to calculate. And so quite literally, that framework is something that has guided me, whether it's conscious or not, through interactions like that. As we're watching, whether the system is a startup, whether the system is a family, but watching systems go through nonlinear progression, nonlinear change.
I love the family analogy. Do you watch The Bear?
No.
Oh,
I don't watch TV. Just
so
sports.
disappointing.
I know. I'm sorry. The chef guy.
Yeah, the chef guy. For those of you that watched The Bear, you'll remember this episode. I can't remember. I think it was season 2, called The Seven Fishes. And it is a great example of a feedback loop gone out of control, where the finale is a car crashes through the house, right? Like it's just a family dinner. I think it's Christmas dinner. I didn't have that. I didn't have Christmas, so I didn't have Christmas dinner, but I think it was Christmas dinner. And it's the worst version of the dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And Amy and I finished watching that, and it was 45 minutes or 60 minutes long, and we had held our breath the whole time. Like it was that intense of a build of just anxiety. You have to kind of go take a nap afterwards. But in the context of a business, like when you talk about the feedback loops, one of the things that I really remember us landing on in the book was this notion that the experiments generate outputs, and those outputs become inputs to the next thing. And it's true with success and failure. You're constantly having to deal with whatever the outputs are become the inputs. And I think what a lot of people miss is this idea of these short, rapid, iterative loops, where a lot of times you get an output and you're like, this output's a useless input. I can't do anything with this. I need to figure out why this didn't generate anything useful. In contrast to so many companies, especially large companies, where the whole goal is to generate the output of process A, and then blindly put the output of process A into new process as the input, even without really recognizing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Let's go back to a couple things in startup communities and startup community way. I made a big mistake in the first book, and I separated the world of a startup community into 2 categories, leaders and feeders. And in that language, I said that the leaders have to be entrepreneurs. Today, I like to say the leaders have to be founders, because the word entrepreneur is overused to apply to lots of people who aren't founders. And the feeders are everyone else. And the mistake I made was that I really classified the feeders as organizations rather than people. And there ended up being people that worked for feeder organizations like university or academia, big companies, service providers, who play a leadership role in the startup community. I remember batting around this word for a while, and you came up with the phrase. Usually I get to claim ownership over a phrase, but in this case, it was yours. So do you want to spend a few moments talking about instigators?
Well, I actually have to correct you. It came from our friend Chris Hively.
Even better.
He doesn't remember this, but he's actually credited as a footnote in the book for this, but he doesn't.
Which I didn't remember.
And he doesn't remember that but this is his, and it's great. And so the idea was, and by the way, that profile that you talked about, which we might call ecosystem builders, community builders, types. And when we put this book out, this framework around complex adaptive systems, like the reaction we would get from those people was, I would say, emotional. Like, you're giving me the language or frame, like, I know this to be true inherently. You're describing my experience and giving me language so that I can explain it to other people. And that is a very good feeling, because I feel like is a core constituency of who we're trying to reach. And so, the term came up to say, like, well, we have to recognize that, yes, a startup community without entrepreneurs who are leading is not a lasting one. But there are more people around the table, especially in the beginning. You've got to, entrepreneurs are busy building their businesses. Maybe they don't yet see the need for collaboration. Many are introverted. They just want to be heads down. So especially in the beginning, it's critical to have these individuals, these community-minded people who, yes, probably have another day job, but also have this credibility, relationship, and a kind of a mindset to want to do public good in this way, helping entrepreneurs succeed.
Let's end with an organization that you're now chair of.
Yeah.
That I was the initial source of. I wouldn't even call it seed funding anymore. I'd call it pre-seed funding.
Yeah.
Given the growth of the organization. And it's an organization that a good friend of both of ours now, John Deere, founded and runs, called Center for American Entrepreneurship. How did you get involved with that? What motivated you to get involved in it? What does it do?
Yeah.
Why should we care?
Yeah. Everyone should care about the mission of CAE, which is to advocate for entrepreneur-friendly policies in Washington, and to a lesser degree in state houses.
A very complex adaptive system. Actually, I think Washington, D.C. is now a chaotic system, which basically has no predictive outcome.
Yeah, it is spiraling into the chaotic domain, absolutely, now that you mention it. So I met John Deere, I don't know, it was 2017 or so. He's got a pretty interesting story. He's a career DC policy guy, right? Lobbying the Hill, dealing with agencies, administrations, but he was in financial policy. Financial crisis happens, 2008-9. Where are the jobs going to come from? So he does some research. Kauffman Foundation research realizes actually jobs come from startups, from entrepreneurs. And so John goes around the country, interviews a lot of entrepreneurs, does these roundtables, writes this excellent book, and creates a policy agenda that if you wanted more startups, if you wanted to help entrepreneurs, which are foundational to growth and job creation, this is what a policy agenda would look like. And he said, well, I should hand this to whatever organization does this. And he realized no organization does this. So there begins the John Deere's entrepreneurial journey, which is as a policy entrepreneur. So founds the organization, walked away from a lucrative job to like a lot of entrepreneurs do, to start this organization. And I met John along the way, I think through his book, was very excited about it immediately, offered to help. Over the years, I've been a board member, I've been an advisor, I've done some research some writing for the organization, and now I'm board chair. And so there's a lot of exciting people involved. We're highly effective. I think we're one of those organizations that I might describe as all cattle and no hat. We do excellent work, and I think this will make sense to entrepreneurs immediately, which is that I learned this from John. You don't affect policy in a permanent way by flying in for photo ops. What you do is you build a network over time within the staffs of Congress and in the agencies. You build relationships with them. You demonstrate value. You build trust. Over time, you become the phone call. Hey, we want to do this, Bill. We're thinking about this. How should we be doing it? CAE is responsible for forming entrepreneurship caucuses in the House and Senate, which provides a permanent platform for entrepreneurship policy making. And yeah, just in general, like we've just been massively successful. We've written bills, some didn't make it through, some did. And really the credit goes to John and amazing board we have and early backers like you who believed in it.
If somebody listening is a successful entrepreneur and that resonates and they want to get involved in some way with the organization, is there an easy way for them to get involved?
Yeah, I would say email John at john@startupsusa.org. We're currently we have an entrepreneurs council that's made of successful entrepreneurs, exclusive sort of events, and
Any well-known ones on there?
I might. It depends. Are you well known?
I don't know. I'm on it, but not well-known.
Yeah, there's some amazing people that you and I are both know and are friends with. Craig Hall, Sean O'Sullivan, others, and Gail Goodman. Like amazing people. We just had a.
Do you know my relationship with Sean?
It goes way back.
Yeah. So Sean, if Sean O'Sullivan is out there, anybody out there knows Sean O'Sullivan. I met Sean in 1994, when he walked into my office in Boston at Feld Technologies. And I came out to meet him, and he was engaged in a conversation with the woman who was sitting at the reception desk about some kind of philosophical thing. The woman sitting at the reception desk that day happened to be Amy, my wife. And I think she was there not because she was working anymore for us. Amy had worked for that company for a couple of years, but I think the receptionist was on vacation or something, and we'd asked Amy to come in and while she was doing whatever her work was, she just sat there because he used to have receptionists and stuff.
Yeah.
And Sean and I hit it off and ended up, he invested early on in the very first company I invested in as an angel investor, a company called NetGenesis. He was the next round investor in it.
Oh, wow.
And we've known each other ever since, but it's awesome that he's gotten involved in SAE as well.
Yeah, I saw him last week in New York. He showed me there's another company you're both on the board of.
Looking Glass?
Yeah, Looking Glass. So he gave me a little product demo of that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, if you need a hologram,
Yeah.
anybody out there need holograms, Looking Glass Factory is the way to do it. But,
I do.
So any new projects that you're working on? Other than your podcast? What's the name of the podcast again?
The podcast is Outsider Inc.
Outsider Inc.
There's a Substack page. You can find it on any podcast platform. Actually, let me give a shout out to anyone who's looking to hire execs especially in go-to-market for enterprise software or other tech. Vela Talent, look her up. She's the best in the biz. So yeah, that's my other shout out, I guess.
Well, welcome to the Give First podcast, where we do unpaid advertisements for our friends and family.
You can't see this, but I'm slipping a 20 across the table for listening.
Well, it doesn't look like it's 20, and they can see that because we have shit. Yeah. Ian, you're awesome. I love spending every time I get a chance to spend a minute with you. I enjoy at least a minute or two.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty good. I'll take that.
Yeah, but
I thought there's only 4 things you like. Am I the 5th thing you love, or is it just
I don't, maybe I don't love, I like very, 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 very much spending time with you. How's that?
Great success.
Thanks for everything you do for founders.
Yeah, man. My pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for listening to the show today. We'd love to hear your feedback, ideas, or who you'd like to hear next on Give First. And please leave a rating and review, ideally a good one. And reach out anytime to podcasts@techstars.com. Or on Twitter, I'm @David Cohen. See you next time. Don't forget, give first.